Well, thank you. I'm delighted to be here and deeply honored to receive this award. Really special to follow in the footsteps of those you've honored before me, especially my great friend, Dr. Jocelyn Elders. And I was just with her 2 weeks ago in New Orleans at the American Public Health Association. But I have very high regards for this organization and what you do, your diversity, which is rare in this field. So I'm delighted about that. But I bring you greetings from the Morehouse School of Medicine. We have a very interesting group that have come together to make up the Satcher Health Leadership Institute. And many of you, of course, know people who work with us. Of course, right with me today are Chris Strasher and Sharon Rachel, two leaders in the area of sexual health and sex education. So we're delighted with the group that we've been able to bring together. It was an interesting experience, of course, serving as Surgeon General with President Clinton and then President Bush. It was interesting. But of course, I survived it. I guess that's one of the things that make me interesting. But I mean, I think the struggle that we're involved in is real. And I'm always encouraged when I meet people like yourself who are committed to this struggle. It's a very important struggle in terms of not just sexual health, but equity in sexual health. I think that's what that's the mission that we're about. I had an opportunity to serve, after I left government in this country, had an opportunity to serve with the World Health Organization's Commission on Social Determinants of Health, beginning in 2005, and we worked for 4 years, traveling all over the world, looking at barriers to health equity, because WHO had announced the goal of global health equity, and about 24 of us traveled all over the world. And as you know, one of the products of that travel and work together was the report on social determinants of health. And I can't think of an area where the issues involved in social determinants of health are more important than the area of sexual health. We define social determinants of health as the conditions in which people are born, grow, develop, learn, work, age. And we pointed out that those conditions are more important than health care itself. And we're learning that, and we're beginning to make progress. Even while reducing costs in health care, we're beginning to make progress in health outcome and in the goal of health equity, starting with the elimination of disparities in health in this country. So I think the approach that came out of that Commission on Social Determinants of Health is very important. We also pointed out that in order to change the social determinants of health, most often you need to change policy. So one of the things that we do at the Satcher Health Leadership Institute is to try to develop strengths among our students and other people in terms of developing policies, influencing policies, informing policies. So that's sort of what we're about. Our mission, tries to express that commitment. We're very committed to diversity. As I said before, we believe it's important. We're trying to really help develop the kind of exceptional leaders that are going to be needed to do what we're trying to do. We're trying to advance and support comprehensive health system strategies. And we're quite involved in promoting policies and practice that will reduce and ultimately eliminate disparities in health. That's what the Satcher Health Leadership Institute is about. But in many ways, it is a continuation of the leadership that I tried to provide as director of the CDC and as Surgeon General and Assistant Secretary for Health. It's really great to be able to have that kind of continuation of your life work and for it not to end when you, for example, leave government. And I've been fortunate in that sense. The Institute of Medicine, actually it was in 1988, released a report, which some of you remember if you're in public health, and it was a report on the future of public health. You remember that report? And in that report, the statement that stood out for me and many other people is the one that said that today the need for leaders is too great to leave their emergence to chance alone. And I have tried to make sure that we didn't leave the emergence of the next generation of leaders to chance alone. And I've appreciated the opportunity to do that. We have developed over the period of, well, now I guess it's been 8 years, a Health Policy Leadership Fellowship Program. It's a one-year program, actually 10 months. And we take people in, not just in medicine, public health, we take people with degrees in psychology, and in the last 3 years we've taken people with lawyers, especially those who are engaged in areas related to disability. We have a very close working relationship with Georgia State and their disability program. We've also done some things that most leadership institutes don't do. Most of the health leadership institutes in this country focus on health professionals and related fields. But we've developed a community health leadership program where we invite community organizations, churches, businesses, others, to recommend people to come and spend 12 weeks with us, people whom they believe can come back to the community and provide leadership, especially in areas of health promotion and disease prevention. So we've now graduated, I believe, 4 classes, but it's no longer just a local program. It was, and then the CDC a few years ago, after I had spoken to their REACH program, and people in the audience from 40 different communities throughout the country were asking how they could take advantage of the Community Health Leadership Program, and I explained to them there was a local program because we didn't have money for the travel and hotels that would be required. So I got a phone call next week, a rare kind of phone call, CDC saying, if we pay for this, people to come, will you expand this program? So now we've had people from at least 12 different states to finish our Community Health Leadership Program, including 10 mayors, by the way, several city council persons and county commissioners. I think that's important because I believe that we need leadership in the community if we're going to get to the bottom of a lot of the problems with which we're struggling. And then the program, which many people say is my favorite program, I don't know how they know that, but it's a program called Smart and Secure Children Quality Parenting Program. We started it about 4 years ago with some funds from the state of Georgia, but we now take about 100 parents a year through a program that really focuses on child development from 0 to 5 and believing that we can enhance the development of children and perhaps give them the kind of start that nobody can ever take away from them by working with parents during this period. We've had some great parents who have helped to develop this program. And so as I said, we're now, I think we have our 5th class, but NIH, after we did an impact study of this program and showed that it enhanced the behavior of children, the learning, reading, et cetera, and not only that, but it also impacted the parents. And the parents really were the ones who came up with this question of what impact did such a program have on the parents themselves. And one of the areas that we decided to look at was depression, and I don't have to tell you that depression has been increasing in recent years among women, especially in urban communities. In fact, in low-income women, it's just now believed to be over 40%. So one of the things we were able to show was that the women who went through this program had a lower risk of depression than other women in the community. So the depression thing is something that we are quite engaged with, and we see this program as not just a program to enhance the future of children, and perhaps when you reduce depression in parents, you do enhance the future of children. Now, I don't have to tell you that 80% of our parents are women. We haven't solved that problem yet. You know, getting men more involved with the rearing of their children, especially in urban communities. So we have about 20% men and about 80% women in this program. We like to say that in order to eliminate disparities in health, we need leaders who care enough, first and foremost. We can't teach that. So we look for people who already have that, right? We want people who care enough. And then, of course, we believe that they need to know enough, have the courage to do enough, and who will persevere until the job is done. I hope you share that commitment with us. We've got to persevere. It is not a short journey that we're involved in, that we're engaged in here, but we have to be committed to seeing it through. And we try to find people like that and to enhance their careers. So just another word about leadership, and then talk about the main topic today, which I think leadership is critical to the future of sexual health in this country. So we especially focus on preparing leaders who are going to be willing and able to provide leadership in the area of sexuality, education, and sexual health. But some of the general themes in our leadership development programs are, one, that leaders respond. I mean, they don't just do strategic plans and follow them. They respond. They respond to opportunities, to challenges, even to crises. And I don't know about you, but I've had a lot of crises to respond to in my life. And we certainly need more leaders who are willing and able to respond to crises. We believe that leadership is a team sport. And that's part of the reason why we decided very early that we weren't going to just develop leadership skills among health professionals and others, but we wanted to have a team of people providing leadership in the community. So we've been trying to develop that team, but we certainly believe that leadership is a team sport. We don't believe that leadership is position dependent, and I'm sure by now you know that people can lead from many different positions. And when that's working very well, the team wins, right? Leadership is transformative. It can actually transform communities. We've seen that many times. We have a desperate need for leadership in this country at the community level, and we've got to work together toward that. Leadership does require global perspective, and I think the social determinants of health report and experience really demonstrated that, right? If you don't have that global perspective, you often don't make the right decisions. But when you see the world and you start setting goals that are global in nature, and our vision, of course, you saw our goal, our mission, but our vision is to have a global impact on the goal of health equity. And finally, leadership is like a relay race. Now, when I was a student at Morehouse, actually more than 50 years ago, so I probably shouldn't be talking about it, but I just celebrated my 50th reunion 2 years ago, so I graduated from Morehouse, now I guess 52 years ago, but I actually, among other things, ran track at Morehouse, and my favorite race was the relay race. Not because I was that good at it, but I ran it at times. Leadership is like a relay race, and we really depend upon people to pass and receive the baton of leadership. And I'm convinced that many of you in this audience today, of course, are committed to to continuing to move that baton forward when it comes to human sexuality and sexual health. But we've got to be attentive to those who are coming after us if we're going to keep this baton going and continue to make progress in this area. We have an interesting history, which I just want to remind you of. But the whole idea of leadership as a relay race has been reflected in the Surgeon General. I don't know if you've noticed that. This is a picture of Luther Terry, who was not the first Surgeon General, but he was the first Surgeon General to release a report to the American people. The Surgeon General's office was developed in 1881 and actually called the Surgeon General's office 2 years later. But it was not until 1964 that the Surgeon General actually issued a report to the American people. So you probably say, well, what was the Surgeon General doing all that time? A lot. I mean, Surgeon General was head of the Public Health Service. The Surgeon General actually oversaw all of those hospitals where soldiers coming back from other countries were treated. And often they had infectious diseases like yellow fever and malaria that we didn't want to spread in the population. So a very important part of that was the Surgeon General's oversight of those military hospitals throughout the country. In time, of course, as you know, we had changes in government. We had the Department of Health and Human Services. So the secretary was head of that whole area, and there was an assistant secretary for health. I served as both Surgeon General and Assistant Secretary for Health. But Luther Terry, as Surgeon General, didn't have the same level of authority as those who came before him. So he really focused on the role of the Surgeon General dealing directly with the American people in terms of information. And it was that role that led to the release of the Surgeon General's report on smoking and health in 1964, the first ever report. And there's a lot I could say about it, but we estimate that about 10 million lives have been saved since that report came out, because people either decided not to smoke, or if they smoked, they found a way to quit. About 43% of the American people were smokers in 1964, and today it's about 18%. So a lot of changes, but don't get me wrong. There are too many Americans who smoke, and if you're in this audience, it's time to quit. Let me make that very clear. So and also you should know that 90% of people who smoke actually become addicted before they're legally old enough to smoke, right? So it's as David Kessler's former FDA head said, smoking is a pediatric disease. And you know, a lot of adults smoke, and a lot of them get sick and die from smoking, but it's a pediatric disease in that's when so many people become addicted. But let me just tell you a brief story about Luther Terry that illustrates part of this. When Luther Terry was on his way to the press conference to release the report on smoking and health, it was actually a Saturday, and there are a lot of issues about why they chose Saturday. But it was a Saturday morning, and he was in the back seat of his car with his assistant, headed to the press conference. I know how that feels. He was a little nervous, so he was smoking more than usual. So his assistant said, well, Dr. Terry, do you know the first question they're going to ask you when you finish presenting this report? He said, no, what's that? He said, they're going to ask you if you smoke. And Dr. Terry said, oh, no, they went, that's a personal question. They don't ask personal questions. So he went to the press conference, and everybody agrees that he did an outstanding job of releasing this first ever report. He set a pace for future Surgeons General. First question, Dr. Terry, do you smoke? And Dr. Terry said, no, I don't. So the reporter had done his job, so he said, well, Dr. Terry, when did you quit? And Dr. Terry said, I quit 30 minutes ago. Yeah. And he never smoked again. Never smoked again. In fact, his son, Michael, tells me that his dad walked around with a lapel pin the rest of his life and said, "Thank you for not smoking." So so the Surgeon General's report has changed a lot of people, including the Surgeon General. And that's important, right? That's really important. I know that the reports I've done have changed me, especially the Surgeon General's report on sexual health. It was the beginning of a lifetime commitment to this area, and that's hopefully been reflected in our programs at the Morehouse School of Medicine. So I thank Luther Terry for that. We released about 14 reports when I was Surgeon General. I know there were 3 reports on smoking, including women and smoking, but also minorities in smoking and reducing tobacco use. One of the last reports that we released was the Surgeon General's call to action to promote sexual health and responsible sexual behavior. That report was released in early, I believe, 2002. It was in the Bush administration when the report was released. It may have been 2001. I get those 2 years mixed up, but I know it was during the Bush administration. It was 2001, I believe. And I won't even go into the story about all of the challenges of getting this report out, which started with the Clinton administration. But the bottom line is we did get the report out in 2001. I don't mean to imply that the Bush administration supported it. They didn't. It was the only report that I released out of 14 where the secretary did not come to the press conference. So it was very clear that they weren't trying to make a statement, but they didn't stop me, and I'm appreciative of that. You know, they didn't support it, but they didn't stop me. So we released it. And that was the beginning, I think, of something in this country that's very important. But now, it had a history, and I don't mean to imply that this report didn't have a history. It had a history. Some of you know that in 1975, the World Health Organization produced this historic document called Education and Treatment in Human Sexuality in Training Health Professionals. And we've been struggling to do that ever since. It called upon societies to provide the necessary sexuality education, counseling, and therapy to promote sexual health and provide training for health professionals. Not many health professional schools do that well, certainly not many medical schools. We're making some progress. Dr. Carrie Bear on our team, who many of you know, is working very closely with the American Association of Medical Colleges, AAMC, and we are gradually getting the kind of requirements into the medical school curriculum that's going to make a difference, I think, in the future, and we need to make a difference. We need to make a difference in medical schools, in nursing schools, and dental schools, schools of public health. And it's been tough getting there, but I think we're beginning to make some real progress. This definition of sexual health from the World Health Organization in 1975 is a very important definition. But I want to remind you of another definition. I don't know if you saw the report that I released on mental health, which was also the first ever Surgeon General's report on mental health. It was released in December of 1999. And I know some of you remember that, some of you were probably involved in that. But in that report, we defined mental health. We didn't want to take for granted that people understood what mental health meant. So we said that mental health was the successful performance of mental functions, such that one could be productive in his or her life and work. We also said that mental health was the ability to develop and maintain fulfilling relationships with other people, beginning with family. I want you to think about that. We went on to say that mental health was the ability to adapt to change in one's life. You know, like adolescence, change can be very challenging in one's life. But mental health was the ability to deal with those, adapt to those changes. And finally, we said that mental health was the ability to deal with adversity in one's life. And I have to tell you, when it comes to sexual health, I think it starts with mental health. And we should be very clear that the ability to develop fulfilling relationships with other people is a major part of what sexual health is about. It should start with parents, and that's why we have now worked on a report dealing with parental education, sexual education of children by parents. Parents have a very important role to play, and part of that is developing and modeling good relationships. Now, I know we live in a society where people don't always think of sex as beginning with real relationships, but it does. And so that definition coming from the definition of mental health is important. But by the same token, the whole issue of adapting to change. We've seen a lot, and I'm sure you know some of the things that have gone on with our troops coming back from especially Afghanistan and Iraq, and the impact that that's had in terms of mental health and the suicide rates and things like that. So adapting to change is critical, but we also know that now that it's critical in terms of sexual health. So the WHO defines sexual health as a state of physical, mental, and social well-being in relation to sexuality. It requires a positive and respectful approach to sexuality and sexual relationships, as well as the possibility of having pleasurable and safe sexual experiences, free of coercion, discrimination, and violence. That's how WHO defines sexual health. You must admit that the WHO was on target. You might even argue that they were ahead of their time in that definition of sexual health. Well, Surgeon General C. Everett Koop, who died last year, he was an amazing person, a great friend, but C. Everett Koop in the early 80s, during the time of the AIDS epidemic, which started in the early 80s, developed a document to send to the homes of every American. Koop had franking privileges, and what that meant was that he could get the post office to send things directly to the American people. For some reason, they discontinued the franking privileges after that. So, because I tried to send something out about hepatitis, and they said, well, we no longer allow franking experiences for surgeons general. But anyway, we get the messages out anyway. But Koop sent a message, and I hope you understand the essence of his message was that if we're going to get on top of this AIDS epidemic, we're going to have to talk about it, including how it is spread. And he said that, you may not be comfortable talking about these kinds of things, and he was right, but if we're going to get on top of the HIV/AIDS epidemic, we're going to have to talk about it. And I'll say that again to you today. We need to talk about sexual health. We need to talk more about sexuality. And America is still not talking about it the way that we need to, beginning with our children. We should talk about more than scandals. We should talk about human sexuality and sexual health. That's what we need to do. I mean, they even had a quiz to see how much people learned from reading this document. Maybe they were trying to see if they read it. So that was pretty smart. But Koop worked with a team. I want you to understand, leadership is a team sport. And one of the strengths of this effort was that it involved people from NIH and the CDC and others, which all of my reports involved. It's one of the great things about the Surgeon General report. It is a team effort, bringing together the best minds in science and public health. And so this was a very important undertaking. I remember this very well because I was president of Meharry Medical College at the time, And I remember the secretary, Otis Bowen, coming to Nashville to talk about HIV/AIDS. And I was president of Meharry, and Vanderbilt was on the other side of town. They were much bigger, more powerful than we were. But Otis Bowen wanted to have a community meeting on AIDS at Vanderbilt. And they said no. And like a lot of institutions back in that time, they didn't want anything to do with AIDS. So they called it a gay disease, and so it was interesting. But anyway, we volunteered to host a community meeting on HIV/AIDS. We did. A lot of people from Vanderbilt came, by the way, to the meeting. It was a great meeting for the community, but somehow the word got back to President Reagan that there was this young guy over there at Meharry who agreed to put on this meeting. Reagan found that very interesting, so he then asked me if I would serve as an advisor on the graduate medical education. I'm telling you this because this is really how I got into government. Became chairman of the Graduate Medical Education Council. We released a report on the needs for health manpower, which President Clinton read when he was running for president. And then he asked me to serve on the committee with Mrs. Clinton trying to reform government. But that's enough of that story. So anyway, but it's interesting how things happen, right? And most people don't associate me with President Reagan, but that's actually how I got into government. And then there was this Surgeon General Elders who didn't follow Koop immediately. I hope you remember that the first woman to serve as Surgeon General was Tony Novella, also the first Hispanic to serve as Surgeon General. And Tony talked a lot about teenage pregnancy. But Jocelyn Elders was the one who urged us to talk about things like masturbation. The country was not ready to talk about masturbation. So now it says on here that she was asked to resign, but since I spend so much time with Jocelyn, I'm gonna tell you what she says. She says, I was fired, and I'm proud of it. She says, and she just said this 2 weeks ago in New Orleans at the APHA. I was on a panel with her. She said, if I had it to do all over again, I would do it exactly the same way. That's Jocelyn Elders. But anyway, she tried to start a national conversation about this area of sexuality, which is still very important, the area of masturbation. Now, this is a little painful for me, but many of you remember that way back in 1932, it was the Public Health Service that started the syphilis study in Tuskegee involving 400 black men. Now, there have been a lot of misconceptions about what happened. What happened was that these men were diagnosed as having syphilis, and they were enrolled in a program, thought they were being treated, but they were being studied to look at the progression of syphilis. Now, some people will say they were not given syphilis. They were diagnosed with syphilis and enrolled in a study thinking they were treated when they were not. And so the Public Health Service studied the progression of syphilis in these 400 black men. It's a terrible story. It involved the Office of the Surgeon General, all the way up to certainly Dr. Leonard Shealy in the mid-50s. It was not until 1972 that the study was stopped. When I became director of the CDC, what we decided to do was to really go back and study what happened. How could the Public Health Service have been a major player in a study based on deception and discrimination? We put together a commission of 100 people, outstanding people, to study this question. And when they brought me the report, it was a powerful report documenting what had happened. And I remember going to Washington and presenting it to Donna Shalala, and I told her that I thought the nation owed an apology, not only to these men and their families, but to everybody impacted by this study. So she said, David, why don't we call and see if President Clinton is in? It was about 8 o'clock that night, and called, and sure enough, he was over there in the White House. And we told him what the report showed, and he immediately said, I agree, we have to issue an apology for this study. But the apology that he issued was a team effort. And so by the time he got the apology ready, we had a group of people who had really put in there that it should include more than just an apology. It should include a requirement that anybody involved in research or taking care of patients had to understand human studies and the responsibility of those involved in them. So you know now that every 2 years, those of us involved with patients or research have to take a test, right? To make sure that we understand the responsibilities of people involved in human studies. Very important. In his apology, President Clinton said that our communities had to be involved in research. We couldn't in the future do research in communities without somebody from that community being involved in oversight of the studies. So if you've been doing research at least lately, you know the impact of that. And the other thing he said was that we needed a center where people are trained in the ethical aspects of research. And that center was established at Tuskegee, by the way. And today at Tuskegee University, the Bioethics Center is now headed by Reuben Warren, whom some of you know, who was once dean of the dental school at Meharry, and then left and spent years at the CDC. So there is a Bioethics Center. Now, we were moving toward developing a national strategy, and that's really what we tried to do with this report. In 2001, a strategy to promote sexual health and responsible sexual behavior was initiated in the United States. That's what this report was. It was really a call to action to promote sexual health and responsible sexual behavior. It was a report that involved a lot of people in the country, a lot of scientists, religious leaders. In fact, I think one of them is here. Bill Staten. Right? Do you know Bill Staten? I know there are others of you in the audience who were involved in putting together that report, but I know Bill Staten played a very critical role as a religious leader, but also, as one who had leadership in public health. And so we appreciate that, and everybody who was involved in that. So it was a very short report, readable, but I think it's had a tremendous impact and continues to have a tremendous impact. It was the first governmental recognition as sexual health as a part of public health. It was prepared in a process that included diverse points of views and viewpoints. There were debates between different people in the group who had different perspectives about religion and sociology and things like that, but they all came together to put together this report. It was, in fact, controversial. The day that I released the report, some of the members of the committee came over to see me to say that they didn't want me to call their names when I released the report. They didn't want to be involved in the press conference, but they had supported the report. And that was good enough for me. We went on and released the report. It was the beginning of a powerful process toward developing a shared public policy. And we're still working on that. We still are not there in terms of what we need to do. CDC has, I think, played a tremendous role in trying to move this forward. It was a vision for the future. Strategies in 3 fundamental areas, and you've heard this before, but increasing public awareness in the area of sexuality and sexual health, implementing and strengthening interventions of all kinds to improve and advance sexual health, expanding the research base, And I know you've heard from people in this conference already dealing with some of those areas. And you'll hear from Jane Fonda tonight in terms of the role of teenage, the nature of teenage involvement in this, very important. And we need to expand the research base. We would later put together a consensus process, which I'll mention more specifically, but one of the things that we were able to get people to agree on was the need to try to push for more research funding in this area from NIH and the CDC. We need to continue to push. It formed the foundation for promoting sexual health and responsible sexual behavior. Always, though, one that's consistent with the best available science. That's how I define a Surgeon General's report. It is based on the best available public health science. That's what it's based on. And so the American people look to that. They look to the Surgeon General to be able to say things that may not be politically popular at the time. I want to say that because if that ever ends, we're going to lose something very special in this country. I think we're the only country that has a Surgeon General as such that can at least issue reports that the administration may not agree with, but they're based on the best available public health science. Very important. Well, so what are we doing? And I'm not talking about you because I don't know what you're doing. But what are we doing? At the Morehouse School of Medicine, we have a Center of Excellence on Sexual Health, funded initially by the Ford Foundation. And again, Chris Strasher and Sharon, Rachel, and others have done a great job, Carrie Bayer. But our mission in SESH is to raise the level of national dialogue on human sexuality, on sexual health and well-being. And it needs to be a sustained, informed, honest, mature discussion. It needs to be based on respect for each other, and it needs to be linked to a dialogue, to action that reflects scientific evidence and deeply held beliefs. So you see how the mission of SESH relates to the report, right? We have 4 areas of focus at SESH, and some of you here have served on the advisory board, and that's why I have that, guided by our National Advisory Council. Members of the Advisory Council who are here, just raise your hand. 1, 2, 3. Yeah, so several members of the Advisory Council are here, and we really appreciate the time and effort you've spent. We are interested in sexual health as it relates to people with disabilities. Very important. We're interested in developing leaders in this area. We started off by developing leaders focusing just on sexual health. Now we've integrated the sexual health curriculum into all of our leadership programs. We're interested in the role of religion and sexual health. And that's become a very important component of what we do. And we're interested in bridge building, and that was the basis of the consensus panel. But Mitch Tepper and others worked very hard to make sure that there was a disability component to our leadership development. We wanted to be a catalyst and advocate for the development and implementation of research and service and education, but also importantly, policies to address the sexual health needs of persons with disabilities and chronic conditions. You know, I think disability is growing in this country. I don't know if you've noticed that. And I can't quite explain that. Now, it may be in part related to aging, but I asked people last night, there are so many people with wheelchairs now when you fly on a plane. I don't know if you've noticed that. Growing number of people with disabilities in this country. I'm not sure that we're clear about all that. Of course, and then we have Alzheimer's, which is growing probably faster than anything in this country, in part because of the aging population, but other things too. So disability is having a more and more impact on our daily lives and on our families. We estimate that we have as many as 15 million family people who are now full-time caregivers. Many of them have had to quit their jobs, their careers to take care of loved ones. Why? Because as a nation, we don't support long-term care. I don't know if you've noticed that. If you can afford long-term care insurance, we need to talk to you. There are not a lot of people in this country who can afford long-term care insurance. But if they can, it means somebody in the family has got to stop working and take care of their loved ones who need more and more care, right? So there's some policy issues here that we really need to deal with. But we're concerned that people with disabilities have sexual needs. We need to understand those sexual needs, and we need to provide for them. Now, we know that one reason disabilities are increasing in this country is because of what's happening on the battlefield. A lot of people who in World War II would have been killed or injured on the battlefield, and they come home disabled. From the Iraq and Afghanistan war, there were people who were just exposed to explosives. They weren't killed. Sometimes they were severely injured. You see more amputations than we've ever seen before. Sometimes they were shocked, and that shock led to post-traumatic stress disorders. That shock led to issues related to disability, amputation. We were aware of that, and we dealt with it. We had places to send people. I won't say how good a job those places always did, but we didn't think much about intimate relationships. That's not something we're a nation, we don't think about that a lot. So what impact did it have on intimate relationships when soldiers came home from Iraq and Afghanistan who had been injured physically, mentally, spiritually? So in 2008, I believe it was, we had the first conference on wounded troops and partners supporting intimate relationship. We had that conference in Washington at the Kaiser Family Foundation. You see Bob Dole there, who was injured in World War II, I believe it was, severely injured, and his great story of how he came back, became a leading senator in this country. And he talks a lot about sexuality, even though a lot of times he does it jokingly, right? Talks about Viagra, even advertised Viagra. So when I called him up to ask him if he would be the luncheon speaker for this conference, he said, "Doctor, are you sure you want me?" And I explained to him that we were serious about this, and we did. And he actually cried during his presentation at that luncheon because he realized how important this issue was to so many people and so many families. Well, you have any idea how many families have been broken because of problems with sexual relationships after these injuries? And in part because nobody talks about it. They just experience it. They don't talk about it, they experience it. So we're trying to make sure that this is included in what we talk about, in what we counsel people about. Not just the injured person, but the family, especially the spouse, and understanding that there are ways that we can overcome some of these problems. That's sexual health in the context of the wounded and the need for intimate relationship. You'd be surprised the difference we can make in this area, and I hope you will work toward helping to make that difference. Then we got involved with the NFL. Now, I have to tell you, they didn't call us to talk about, they didn't call us to talk about intimate relationships. No, there were more and more former NFL players who were having problems sleeping, problem with anger management. Those problems with their spouses attacking them. They didn't say much about sexuality, but we found out that was a major part of the problem. That these former players who had experienced concussions were having all kinds of problems. Many of them were depressed, and as you know, suicide occurred in many former NFL players. Many of them went on to have, complete chronic traumatic encephalopathy. We worked very closely with Sylvia Mathis, the wife of Mackey, the wife of John Mackey. And if you're a football fan, you remember that John Mackey may be the greatest tight end in our history, played with Baltimore. But John Mackey became a virtual vegetable, and his wife, in taking care of him, became concerned about other people. But it was only after we got the spouses and the players to come to these community meetings, and we separated them after dinner so the spouses could talk about things that they weren't comfortable talking about with their husbands. And so this is an area where we need help in terms of sexual health. People need to understand not just the problems, but how do we together overcome them. So this is an area of disability in terms of human sexuality. I just want you to know, I'm just not describing the problems out there, I'm describing where you can make a difference. And you're going to be asked to make a difference as we move forward with these issues. I mean, it's time. You'd be surprised how many families have been broken, how many people have separated because they didn't understand or couldn't even talk about the impact that this problem was having on their sexual relationships. We have trouble talking in this area. Well, the Satcher Health Leadership Institute developed a sexual health scholars program. Bill Staten was involved with that also. And we developed a health policy fellowship. We ultimately integrated the sexual health program into all of our programs, especially the health policy fellowship. And we've had several groups to graduate now from that. You see them there with John Lewis because they always spend a week in Washington. Religion and sexuality is very important. Regardless of one's religious tradition, regardless of your denomination or your deeply held beliefs and practices, this intersection of faith and sexuality is really critical and fundamental to one's sexual health and approach to sexuality education. So how does our definition of sexual health differ from the World Health Organization? It is the presence of complete physical, mental, social, and spiritual well-being. So we added spiritual because we believe that one's religion does make a difference in how one approaches sexuality. And we've had that experience, not just, we are fortunate we now have a chair in sexuality and religion endowed by Marta Weeks, and that's David Richards. It's named the Weeks Richard endowed chair in sexuality and religion. And if we are recruiting for an occupant of that chair, which we hope to have filled by the end of this academic year. But it's a major part of our programs for the future. We had a consensus process in which we brought together 25 people from different organizations. Some of them were very conservative organizations. Some of them were moderates. Some of them were liberal. Some of you were involved. And we met for 18 months. I wouldn't tell you that it's an experience that I want to have again anytime soon, but it happened. And it was a very important experience. The first meeting, some of the people, because these people have been debating back and forth online, and some of them actually didn't see that they could ever sit down in the same room with some of the other people. So some of them came to the first meeting with bodyguards. But we got through that, and we met for 18 months. And we ended up, still not agreeing on certain things. People came, and some of them left, still feeling that, homosexuality, they had a view of it based on their biblical teaching and how they interpreted it. But we made progress in a vision for sexual health. We made progress in agreeing about the need for certainly more research in sexual health and sexuality, and hopefully that's gradually developing. And there are a few other areas, but we didn't agree on everything. One of the things that came out of that consensus panel that we're very proud of, because I think we're on to something, and it will be integrated into our Smart and Secure Parenting program, and that is the role of parents in sexual health education. There are a lot of parents who are certainly not comfortable talking to their children about sexuality. I mean, after all, nobody talked to them about it, right? So they're not comfortable, and so we want to be able to work with parents. The CDC is supportive of this in terms of parental health, sexual health education. It's a major part now of what we do, and it came out of the consensus process. I think the benefits of the national consensus process, it allowed us to develop and foster sustained relationships, created sort of a common language, new clarity, new agreements, but it certainly didn't solve all of our disagreements. We also became involved with a global program, the Anglican Communion in Daba. A lot of issues globally. The Anglican Church has issues with the role of women in the church, the role of gay bishops, and in some places, including some parts of Africa, there's a lot of discrimination around those issues. So we became involved with the Anglican Communion, and I think made some progress, but there's still a lot of progress to be made. But I hope you get a feeling for the kinds of things that we're trying to do as we go forward. One of our graduates working with the CDC put together a green report, if you will, and I believe it was the National Center for HIV, STD, and TB, which we started when I was director of the CDC in 1995, 96, with Helene Gill as the first director. As you know, Helene Gill is now head of CARE. But those were the things that we're trying to continue to push on. We've learned that we need to work together. We need to respect our differences. We need to recognize and celebrate diversity, right? We need to find common ground. We're not going to agree on all things, but if we don't find common ground, then we won't be able to lead anybody forward. So we do need, within this community, to make sure we're clear about the things that we agree upon, and also respect disagreements, which is probably the most difficult thing. We need to bring leaders together, and it's essential for lasting public health policy. We've got to continue to advance public health policy, and doing nothing is not acceptable. But it's not going to be easy. That's the Surgeon General's prescription, which I still pass out. And I remember, however, going to speak at a high school, and I'll close with this, but it was a leading high school. They had brought together the star students from several high schools and asked me to speak. And so I prepared to speak. It was on sexual health. I was backstage with the associate principal, and we told them that we wanted to pass out this Surgeon General's prescription to all the students. There were about 1,000 students there. We brought over 1,000 prescriptions. So the associate principal she said, "Oh, sure, Dr. Satcher, definitely." She took the prescription, she read, said, "Moderate physical, yes, eat at least 5, yes, yes. Avoid toxins," she said, "Oh, yes. Responsible, oh my goodness, Dr. Satcher, we can't talk about that. We're not allowed to talk about sex in this school." I said, "But that's what I'm going to talk about today." And then she said, "Well, Dr. Satcher, I tell you what, don't tell anybody that I read this prescription, and we're going to pass it out." So they passed it out, and I talked about it. But I just want you to know that we have some real hills to climb in this area together. It's not necessarily going to be easy. We have a lot of misplaced policies and practices as it relates to sexual health. But I close with sort of my favorite quote, because I don't want you to think that because it's not easy, it can't be done. I think the main thing is for us to be committed to the goals. Benjamin Mays, who was president of Morehouse College when I was a student there, back in the days when we were going to jail for trying to eat in restaurants in Atlanta, used to come speak to the students every Tuesday morning a tremendous motivator of students who came from families like myself whose parents didn't finish elementary school, students from the fields of Mississippi and Tennessee and all over, and he was determined to convince us that we were special, that regardless of where we came from, we were supposed to be leaders. So Benjamin Mays used to say that it must be borne in mind that the great tragedy of life is not in failing to reach all your goals, it's in having no goals for which you're reaching. It's not a calamity to die with dreams unfulfilled, but it is a calamity not to dream. It's not a disaster if you somehow fail to achieve your highest ideas. It's a disaster if you have no higher ideas for which you're striving. It's not a disgrace to fail to reach the stars. It's a disgrace to have no stars for which you're reaching. In the final analysis, he said, not failure, but low aim is sin. We must be committed. We must make sure that we're not guilty of low aim. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thanks very much. I'm enjoying this, but we got to leave some time for questions too. So, all right, thank you very much. We have microphones scattered around, so. Question, the only thing I ask that you not make your comments too long.
Is this on?
Yeah,
Can
behind you, oh, I'm sorry. There's somebody behind you, Sharon. Go ahead.
So I have a question. I'm over here.
Oh, good.
One of the things that strikes me most about your presentation is this ability to have civil conversations with people who think differently from us. I think that's one weakness, that we're always talking to each other, and I'm just curious about what are the highlights of what makes us able to have those conversations to move the field along. What stands out for you?
Well, I think it begins by caring. You've got to really, I think, care about all people, including those who disagree with you. You got to care about their children, too, about the people who are being influenced by them. So I think it starts with caring. But I also think you have to be confident enough in your message that you can stand to listen to theirs and then expertly communicate your message. So I think caring is the first part of being successful in dealing with people who differ with you, and we deal with a lot of them. Listening, and we teach our fellows that the most important part of communicating is listening. It's not talking. It's great to be able to talk, but it's more important to be able to listen and to really understand not just what people are saying, but what they're feeling. So, but I think it starts with caring about people enough to listen to what they have to say, even though you don't necessarily agree with it, and then responding with the message that's based on knowledge and really confidence that you're headed in the right direction. Great question. Thank you.
We have one over here.
Mm-hmm.
So you talked a lot about teamwork, so I was just curious, what are the elements that you think are really important for people to work as a team?
The question was, I guess you heard the question. Team. We believe that leadership is a team sport. And what are the elements? Number one, I think leadership is important on the team. I think because leadership is responsible for putting the team together and keeping it together. It can be very frustrating working with teams. You ever tried it? I mean, sometimes it really gets frustrating, but you got to have the patience. There are going to be some people on the team who know more about some things than you do. There are going to be some people on the team who think they know more about things than you do. But I do think having a strong team means that you're going to have disagreements, and hopefully you're going to have some people on the team who know more about some things than you do. And you got to respect that And I think it's the leader's responsibility to make sure that the team respects each other and that the team gels toward the goal. So I think leadership is critical. I think communication is critical, getting people to listen to each other, and being patient with the development of the team. The more difficult sometimes it is in working with teams, the stronger the team is going to be when you really need to work together. Sometimes those battles you've had, those disagreements, are really going to pay off when you really meet the real foe. We had that experience in Nashville with the Nashville General Hospital, a hospital where Meharry had been excluded for 100 years. And then trying to move from that to having that hospital move to Meharry's campus was not easy, but we had a strong team. And that team included people in the community who made sure that the city council got the right messages. So I think strong teams begin with strong leadership. It includes strong communication, especially listening to each other, and continuing to expand so that in time the team is bigger and it includes people in the community. And that's part of what we're trying to do.
Okay, we have one here.
Hello, I'm Emily. I've been worried lately about the pressure on the FDA by the pharmaceutical industry around the medicalization of women's sexual functioning. As you were saying with soldiers, the women's sexual satisfaction and functioning is so essential to the overall being of families. I've seen relationships end because they couldn't understand what had happened to their sex lives. So that's like a crucial issue for me. So I was wondering if the medicalization and women's sexual functioning was on your radar, if you had advice for how we can help.
Well, I certainly agree with you that it's a critical issue. But I think, I mentioned some of the areas where that issue is especially critical and where it's being challenged by experiences. But I think we've got to get more people communicating with one voice about the importance of that. Believe it or not, the FDA listens occasionally. I happen to know Peggy Hamburg quite well. She was Assistant Secretary for Planning and Evaluation when I was Surgeon General and Assistant Secretary for Health. And I think this FDA is listening better than most. So it's really time to make sure that we're communicating these messages. But we've got to stay the course, and we've got to make sure that everybody's on message. But it's a critical issue. Families are destroyed because of a lack of sexual satisfaction. So it's not a trivial issue at all. And so I agree with you, it's important, but I also agree that we need to find a way to speak with a strong and common voice.
Hi, thank you. First of all, thank you very much for your work. And my name's Laura. Since you first released your call to action, a lot has happened politically. Do you see the obstacles getting easier or staying the same as far as you being able to achieve the goal, work to achieve the goal for sexual health equity, especially?
Well, wow. These are tough times, let me tell you. My experience has been that sometimes it is during tough times that you make the greatest progress. It's obviously clear that a lot of people were elected, who don't necessarily agree with some of the things that we think are critical in this area. But we have made a lot of progress, even with the Supreme Court. We've made a lot of progress, and in these tough times especially, we've got to keep pushing, communicating the message, getting more people involved. That's when it's important to get communities together, when Washington may be most dysfunctional in some ways. But I don't know what's going to happen, after January. But I do know in my own life and experience, sometimes it is the period that seems to be the toughest that you make progress. I don't know if you remember, but you don't remember. You're probably not old enough to remember. But when Koop was up for Surgeon General, his confirmation was delayed by almost a year because he was so conservative, right? You remember that, some of you? And then, when the tough time came, he rose. He was able to do things that maybe somebody else who was more liberal, because President Reagan wouldn't have appointed somebody probably more liberal, but Koop was finally confirmed, and he was changed by that office and by the problems that he saw and the people with whom he communicated. And so we don't remember him as a stubborn, old, conservative, surgeon. We remember him as somebody who moved the agenda forward tremendously. Don't forget that. It's sometimes during the toughest time that we make the greatest progress.
All right, we have 2 more questions.
Hi, good afternoon. I'm Jessie Boyer with SECUS, and thank you so much for your leadership. I was very selfishly thrilled to hear you kick off your remarks this afternoon talking about the importance of engaging in policy, and was wondering if you could talk about the role of sexual health educators and experts across the community, across the country, in the development of the 2001 strategy and the group effort that entailed.
So you're asking me to remember the details of the role of sexual health educators. I can only tell you that they played a major part, because I had people on my staff too. You probably remember that people like Beverly Malone and Jenna Betts and others. Jenna was Deputy Assistant Secretary for Health. Beverly Malone, she now runs the nursing learning, whatever it's called, the organization program. No, I think it's more important than ever that people involved in sexual health education play a more leadership role. I was fortunate to be involved with people like that who had the knowledge and the motivation to move the agenda forward. So I have a great appreciation for the role of sexual health educators. Thank you.
Oh, wait, we have one last question here in the back. Hi, I just wanted to know. Here. Hey.
Oh, you're way back there?
Hi. I just want to know what's left on your list. Like, what are you going to reach for next? What's your star?
You mean other than retirement? No, I'm never going to stop working. But obviously, I think we live in a global community, and that's for sure. And we've got to become more involved with the global agenda, right? And I think it's going to help us if we become more involved with the global agenda, because some of the things that we're trying to do, we need more allies, and some of them are not necessarily going to come from within the United States. So I hope to continue to be involved with the global program. WHO finally had a treaty on tobacco in 2003, and that treaty passed, and now we have 150 countries who signed that, and these countries where smoking was increasing as it was decreasing in this country are now following the same agenda for reducing smoking. It's just one example of how something that started with the Surgeon General's report in this country is now a part of the agenda of 150 countries, many of them developing. But you know who's not one of those 150 countries to sign that treaty? The United States, because you couldn't get it through Congress. So, but it doesn't matter. I mean, we're moving forward, I think, but I just want you to know that that's an example of where the World Health Organization finally had the first ever treaty conference, agreed on some things that are going to protect children all over the world from becoming addicted to tobacco before they're old enough to smoke. And it passed. 150 countries have signed it. And even though the United States is not one of them, the impact that it's going to have globally is tremendous. So I hope to continue to be involved in that, and certainly continue to be involved in helping young people to develop their leadership skills. I tell our fellows that I've been involved in leadership roles for more than 40 years. And if I just spent all of my time with them telling them about the mistakes I've made, it would be enough for a full course. But seriously, I think we have to share our experiences, good and bad. We can't just get in front of people and brag about what we've done. We've also got to talk about the struggles that we've had, so that when they face struggles, they will know that that's a part of successful leadership. And we've had our struggles here below, but if we care enough, then we keep pressing, and we have to keep pressing as long as we're breathing, and that's certainly what I plan to do. Thank you. Thank you.
So we'd like to make our honorees sing for their supper. So in exchange for that wonderful speech, here, in fact, is the award for you and the organization you head. Thank you so much.
Thank you. I'm deeply honored and very pleased to accept this award on behalf of the Satcher Leadership Institute. Thank you.